Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 9th of May, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. You can do that anytime by calling 1-800-472-0391. That's the Alaska Weather Information Line. Online, you'll find us at weather.gov/Alaska. One click on the page will get you to your local forecast from your local forecast office in Fairbanks, Juneau, or Anchorage. You can also find helpful information from the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit, the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center, which is monitoring breakup across the Yukon right now, and I believe they're nearly done with the Kuskokwim as of this afternoon. And of course, you can find some of the information, the latest quakes around the world, and anything that's happened around Alaska from the National Tsunami Warning Center right here in Alaska. Let's take a look at what's going on closer to where you are. And in the Alaska Range, the Deltana, Tanana Flats region, as well as the Denali region, we're watching for wind gusts out of the south up to 60 miles per hour may be possible in this region as we head into tomorrow and tomorrow afternoon, evening, and into Friday. And with that goes increased fire danger. What we don't have showing here is a fire weather watch for this entire region. And because of the winds, because of the drier conditions, and now the exposed brush that is drying out in the wind, any risk of burning there, we're not expecting lightning strikes or anything at this point, but any risk from burning that you may be doing could elevate that fire danger, and conditions will be growing to a point where fire could spread fairly quickly, especially due to the wind and early season dry conditions. Now, one thing that will happen as we go into the weekend is that those drier conditions and the wind are going to spread northward, and this could move into the Fairbanks region as we head into Friday. So keep that in mind. And always be careful with fire. Never leave fire unattended. And this is the time of the year where things get out of control quickly from our actions, especially when we have no thunderstorms or lightning in the region. So it's on you to be careful, and please do so. Here's a look at what's going on across the region for breakup. And you are seeing changes in Eagle. Yesterday, the ice started to move there, and that was good news for the folks in Eagle. Of course, this is the time of the year where folks along the river are watching everything so carefully and with high anxiety, and for good reason, because this is the time of the year where we get those floods. And so in Eagle, we noticed that the ice was on the move yesterday, and we've marked that as some open to mostly open at this point. The Tanana and the Dehne rivers are all seeing some improvement there and opening all the way down toward the Yukon. That's where that stops. And then as we get all the way out toward the Yukon Delta, no major change there. You'll notice the Kuskokwim, though, has seen significant changes just in the last 4 to 5 days. Big changes there as well along the Susitna. Expect that to continue to show improvement in the coming days. So a lot of heat in the middle and eastern parts of the interior, where temperatures have reached into the 60s again today. And here's why. Here's a look at the visible satellite picture, and you can see low pressure sitting just offshore of southeast, helping to draw in warm air here. But we also have that southerly flow making its way over the mountains, and that drying effect that has when the air descends off the mountains is just boosting temperatures into the upper 50s to mid 60s. A couple areas here look like they poked into the 70-degree range earlier today. We saw that around Skagway. We saw temperatures in the mid 60s around the capital city, 40s and 50s a little bit further south. And then out west, you have this very large area of low pressure across the Bering Sea. This is our controlling feature under the jet stream that's carved out a huge trough across a large portion of the Western Gulf and the Bering Sea. This has put most of Alaska into that very broad southerly flow, and as this continues, it brings up wave after wave after wave of low pressure that is keeping clouds across south central, but it's adding a lot of warmth to places in southeast and the central and eastern interior. It's really focusing, though, the very active weather and the wetter weather across western Alaska. So as you get into southwestern Alaska, another round of rain has been moving through your region, Nome and Unalakleet. Into Norton Sound, you're seeing some light rainfall today. Parts of southeast along the outer coast also getting a brush with some of that wetter weather, but just north of that is where we're finding that very high heat for southeast today. Low pressure across southern Bering Sea sitting at 980 millibars, more of a west and northwesterly flow coming into the central chain. With that is a little bit of light rain. We're also picking up some rainfall around Kodiak Island. And just on the southern end of your screen there, you can see the next weather maker already making its way into the Gulf. That's at 985 millibars. This is going to be a fast mover. It's going to quickly move into Kodiak Island late tonight and early tomorrow morning, heading for south central. It comes with a lot of wind. It looks like about 974 as we get into tonight and early tomorrow. The triple point already working its way up toward Kodiak City as we get into the early morning hours of your Thursday. Thursday, and that will bring some of the more active weather, the wetter weather, the winds, probably through your region. So watch for some higher winds there in the marine zones, and again some wet weather and changes to perhaps your aviation forecast as you go through your daytime tomorrow. Look out towards southeast, shows little movement in the low pressure system just south and west of Haida Gwaii. This will continue just lingering, slowly creeping northward and pushing more clouds and heat your way. But as you get into the rain and the clouds tomorrow, it's probably not going to be quite so warm as it was today. Across parts of the western Alaska Range, this is where we expect to see more obscurations, probably more trouble getting through the passes there due to low clouds and visibility. Mainly in the western end of the range, though. As you get out toward Isabel and Windy Pass and Dehne and out into Antasta Pass, things look pretty good. Should be generally smooth sailing there. You're also going to run into turbulence issues across southwest tonight and tomorrow. A little bit further north, periods of snow and rain will mix together around the Bering Strait. Across the southern end of the Bering Sea and the central chain at 984 millibar low is not to be forgotten. That starts dropping southward to about 989 millibars as we head into your Thursday. Rain showers more likely with that. The wind a little bit tight on the gradient, generally west of Adak and Atka, but it should be fairly well confined. Our low pressure system across southwest is tightening up even more as we get through the day on Thursday, and you can see the front still not quite to Homer by Thursday afternoon. Rain ahead of that into Prince William Sound, and rain on the western side of Cook Inlet. So it looks like most of what we'll see from Kenai northward toward Anchorage, Matsu, and up the Parks Highway, a lot of that will really be just off to the west. So a drier day, maybe some sprinkles, and probably some wind and turbulence for those of you flying through. For parts of southeast, we're still looking at passing rain showers. There will be some breaks in the clouds, but overall, you can see you are under more of a ridge than anything else. This band of warmer air is still creeping your way, but warmer weather will still be in control of your region. Across the eastern interior, we're still looking at some heat. That southerly flow moving off the mountains should keep things generally dry for you and warm. And remember, we're watching those winds come up across the Alaska Range, and that improves, or I guess we should say worsens, our risk for fire danger there. It looks like that will be a problem creeping its way northward as the winds do, and so does the warmth. Across the Chukchi coast, periods of rain and snow will still be found, especially along the coast and west, but onshore, the Noatak Valley, parts of the Seward Peninsula and Norton Sound, you're looking at rain showers. And as we get into Friday, not a big change. In fact, it looks like more areas and more parts of interior Alaska will be talking about liquid precipitation. So is this summertime? Could be, if your measure of seasons is what does the precipitation fall at, then this would do the trick. This would qualify, I guess. We are still under a ridge for southeast as we get into Friday. That will keep some warmth in there, even though there's going to be some rain in the region. A front moves over south central in the Kenai Peninsula in through Prince William Sound. Plan for rain and wind there, but the tightest part of the gradient is shifting eastward. Southwest, low pressure still sitting right off Cape Newenham there at 987 millibar low. That's the same one that's been in the same place for the last couple days now. So it will continue that wet southerly flow for you. Rain showers spread northward into the Kobuk and Noatak. Maybe some Brooks Range Summit snow showers there. And out west, here's our next weather maker working its way into the western Bering. Let's take a look at temperatures. We know it was warm today, very warm for southeast, into the 70s around Skagway, 60s and maybe a few 70s around the interior. Overnight mild, 30s and 40s there, mid-40s for many in south central. Southeast, you're looking at mid-40s as well up north. Teens and 20s there at the southwest coast, one of the only places that's really looking at a decent chance of going at or below freezing. Afternoon highs for your Thursday, upper 60s and lower 70s again for the Tanana and the middle and upper Yukon Valley, not bad at all. 50s and 60s for south central Kodiak, 45 and rain. Upper 50s and maybe some 60s for parts of southeast. Remember, that ridge is really impressive. 42 around Nome, around 30 there for Wainwright. Barrow about the same. Kaktovik maybe upper 20s for you. Bristol Bay temperatures in the 40s and 50s, as well as the Aleutian. St. Paul 38 down to 34 for Friday morning. Mild for many across the interior, south central and southeast again for Friday morning. 30s to mid 40s for many, 20s for the North Slope, and highs on Friday back in the upper 50s to low to mid 60s for your afternoon in the upper Yukon.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
On to flying weather now. As we look at Thursday morning, look for IFR conditions across the North Slope, especially the Beaufort Seacoast. The Chukchi will likely be VFR at least through a good chunk of Thursday morning. But once you get down to the Seward Peninsula, the YK Delta, Norton Sound, and just areas north of Lake Iliamna, you're going to run into fairly widespread MVFR and hit and miss IFR across the region, including St. Lawrence Island, as well as areas south and west of Kodiak Island, all the way back towards Sand Point, and MVFR west of Nikolsky and Unalaska. Now for southeast and most of the eastern Gulf, you're looking at MVFR to start with, IFR across the eastern Kenai Peninsula. You'll see that really focus on some of the southern parts of the Gulf as we get into the afternoon. Notice IFR stays in place across the Beaufort Seacoast. MVFR spreads a little bit further south, and MVFR also spreads into the Kobuk and Noatak Valleys, the southern Seward Peninsula, and most of Bristol Bay is looking at least some MVFR and maybe even IFR as the day goes on, with IFR spreading into the southern parts of Cook Inlet and also, again, a large part of the central and eastern Gulf. That band lifts northward along a frontal boundary for Friday morning, with MVFR spreading into the outer coast of northern sections of southeast. You notice the inside passages look pretty good at this point, as well as Chilkoot and White Pass. IFR spreads out across the north into places west of Wainwright, and then south of St. Lawrence Island to Nunivak Island, inland from Cape Newenham, and around Togiak and southward. You're looking at IFR conditions in the morning with most of Bristol Bay under MVFR. By the afternoon, that may break up a little bit more, but there's still going to be a healthy band of IFR conditions expected around Nunivak Island to about St. Matthew and Point southward. Most of that, though, offshore, with IFR developing west of Windy Pass and Isabel Pass to just about Rainy Pass by the afternoon on Friday, so get moving and get back early. And IFR conditions across some of the higher terrain for southeast with MVFR fairly widespread across the inside waters there. Let's take a look at your pass conditions in detail for Thursday. For right now, Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass look to be pretty good at VFR levels there for both Thursday morning and afternoon. For Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, expect an IFR start with some gradual improvement as the afternoon goes on. Rainy Pass looking for marginal conditions most of the day. Windy Pass also looking for marginal conditions. Remember, we were just showing that Friday could worsen just a little bit, so keep that in mind as your plan. Isabel Pass, VFR conditions expected there. Mentasta Pass looks pretty good. Same goes for Tanita Pass for your Thursday. And as we get into Thursday for Portage Pass, IFR conditions are expected to improve slightly by the afternoon. Again, with the worst of that will be on the Prince William Sound side. And Chilkoot and White Pass also expected to start at IFR with some improvements toward marginal conditions as your day goes on. Now, freezing levels, this looks a lot different than it did just a week ago. We're now seeing a lot of warmth and at elevation fairly high up there. We're talking about 6,000 to 8,000 feet across the interior. This almost looks like a summertime pattern. The numbers might be a little bit higher, but there's still a wealth of cold air here on the west side of the low pressure system. So we've got our surface freezing line right over the Bering Strait. The line for the surface cold is just south of the Brooks Range summits, and you can see it zigzagging across western Canada. We've got our levels up above 6,000 feet for most of southeast. Once again, the interior between 6,000 and 8,000 feet, south central between 2,000 and 8,000 feet, and the west is just down fairly low at or above 2,000 feet, if that. So pretty strange stuff for this time of the year, and you'll notice the icing potential also reflects kind of this different pattern. You'll notice between 4,000 and 8,000 foot levels there across the region of the Bering Strait and the Chukchi Coast, above 9,000 feet for south central and southwest, until you get out to the central chain where you're on the colder side of the low, above 3,000 feet, therefore at least a risk of isolated moderate. So the jet stream has our low pressure system here south of the chain, strong southerly flow in the western Gulf, and then you can see that ridging over into western parts of the lower 48, and a huge ridge across most of Alaska at this point. That is where we're getting that elevated warmth from. The deep southerlies continue at 9,000 feet. Wind speeds here between 50 and 60 knots at their strongest, heading over Bristol Bay and across the southern chain. And again, those light southerly winds pick up a little bit more across the eastern Gulf, with also light winds from the south, just south of Dixon Entrance. Offshore winds continue for many on the west coast. Wind speeds there 25 to 30 knots. Southerlies across south central, and north and westerlies working across the chain. The strongest winds right around Kodiak Island at this point, about 65 knots from the south. Turbulence, we're going to have some across south central, Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, and the Alaska Range. Considerable moderate is expected there below 4,000 to 5,000 feet. So plan on being choppy flying there as you go throughout your day. Central and western parts of the chain also looking at chop below 5,000 feet. An isolated moderate will be possible across the north slope. So watch for changes and for this to spread out a little bit more into the rest of the week. Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining us here today is Eric Stevens from the Geographic Information Network of Alaska at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, GINA for short. And Eric, you frequently come on the show to tell us about these really cool things that we're doing with satellites over Alaska and how we can use these really awesome tools. But I'm thinking all the while there has to be a mad scientist somewhere working on the next cool thing in the satellite laboratory. What is being developed today?
Right. Well, you know, when I was a kid growing up in the boonies in North Dakota there, on Sunday after church, the old people, like my parents and their parents, would gather and have coffee and talk. And I kind of eavesdropped on them a little bit. And the theme of a lot of these conversations seemed to be, well, isn't it amazing what they can do these days, someone would say.
Sure.
And I was thinking, oh, I don't know, I was too young.
Right.
Well, now I'm old enough in the weather satellite business.
You can remember when.
The new generation of weather satellites, I'm starting to say, isn't it amazing what they can do these days? Because it's always improving.
Yes.
Maybe an analogy here is like television. Television started in black and white, then it went to color. Analog signal transitioned to digital here a number of years ago. Standard definition becomes high definition. Right. Well, weather satellites are changing too. First weather satellites went up around 1960, not that long ago. No. It's comparatively young science. And every time a new series of satellite is launched, we learn from the past, so the mad scientists decide, well, we could make the next satellite even better in such and such a respect. Yes. And now the United States is on the verge of launching, or in progress of launching, a series of new geostationary satellites that are better than ever before. Okay. Let's take a look at some of the previews of what these new satellites can do.
Peek inside the lab here, okay.
Yeah, and so we'll peek in, and here are some mad scientists and mad technicians dressed in bunny suits. This is, believe it or not, this is the business end of a weather satellite under construction in a clean room. You don't want a speck of dust on the lens of a weather satellite's camera. So this is done in a clean environment. They are building a geostationary satellite there.
Oh, cool.
This new generation of satellites, if you had to answer the question, why are these better? Why do we care? Okay. You could answer it with 3 words: faster, better, more. The new generation of satellites are faster than the older ones. The images are sharper, they're better, and there's more spectral channels. We'll talk about that.
Any one of these called Steve Austin sounds faster, better, stronger.
Yeah. You know what, though? These things cost more than $6 million.
Yeah, I'm sure.
They're pricey. But they are an essential tool for the Weather Service to fulfill its mission of protecting lives and property.
Exactly.
You got to have the tool to do the job. And it helps all of us when we get the accurate forecast, the warning in time, and this is the tool. Faster. On left here, we see what the old generation of satellites could scan in 5 minutes. On the right, that's what you get in 5 minutes, the whole planet, or at least one side of it. So it's faster. That means you can take more images over a given amount of time and make smoother movie loops out of that. Because animating movie loops really helps you highlight a feature that maybe you can't see as well in a single image.
Absolutely does, yep.
Let's zoom into a small piece of real estate, like Texas.
Sure.
And we can see here a satellite that has a 1-minute movie loop visible light. You can see thunderstorms boiling there.
Yeah, look at that.
Yeah, the rippling of the top of the thunderstorm. This is a fun movie loop. We're going to be able to see things like this more and more often because of the new satellites being generated. Some things are only evident in animation. So that's faster. Well, what's better? We're able to now have sharper imagery than before. The Japanese have a satellite that uses the same imager that is on the new generation of satellites that America is launching too. An imager, that's just a word for camera. It's the camera on a weather satellite. We have something called the Advanced Baseline Imager.
Sounds important.
ABI. It's important enough, it has an acronym. Everything's an acronym. Well, an ABI-like instrument is here over the Western Pacific, and we can see this color image. This is what a human eye might see if you were riding on the satellite. But it's a little bit fuzzy. With new technology, you can post-process the image taken by the satellite to highlight and sharpen some of the features. So this image here of the Western Pacific then becomes this image. Thanks to the processing techniques, yes, this is the newest technology. So we've got a new satellite that can provide better data than ever before. And on the ground, we can process it better than before as well to really sharpen up the imagery and to give us a better view of the weather than ever before. So faster and better and more. What do we mean by more? Well, on the older generation of satellites, the imager, the camera, had 5 slices of the spectral pie, visible imagery, infrared imagery, something we can't see from the human eye. A lot of different slices of the pie. We're going from 5. The new imager has 16 slices. Each slice has its own relevance. Some are best for volcanic ash, for smoke, for dust, for telling the difference between smoke and dust, which can look similar under some infrared channels, but other ones bring out certain things. All of these 16 bands are important. In fact, some of the mad scientists, they didn't want 16, they wanted 24. There's always more you can do. But that'll be the next generation of satellites. So now we say, isn't it amazing what we can do these days? And you know what? It makes you think, well, what's the future going to be like too? It's so important to be able to know what's going on now in the weather. If you're going to forecast the future, you got to know where things are now. And satellites are the way to see that, especially in Alaska, where we don't have as many observations down on the ground. The satellites fill in the holes.
Yeah, really important stuff. And I love hearing about what we can see right now, but I love thinking about what is possible in the future. It's amazing stuff. And since you paid for it, it's a good time to learn about it. If you'd like, check out the website at www.goes-r.gov. And as I understand, it's a really easy website to use.
Oh yeah, a lot of good information about what these new satellites mean to Americans. And it's the Weather Service's mission to protect lives and property, and this is the tool how to do it.
Cool stuff, Eric. Thanks so much for sharing that with us today, and thank you for joining us right here in Alaska Weather Facts. We'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Time for a look at your sea ice edge, and that ice edge is shrinking and shrinking as we go into the 9th and 10th of May now. You'll notice that we've got several open areas, or more open areas, across north of the Bering Strait into the Kotzebue Sound region and off the Chukchi coast. However, with the movement of the ice, a lot of this is starting to fill in, and the Polina off the coast of the Chukchi from Barrow down toward about Point Leyte is filling in with some higher concentration ice. North of St. Lawrence Island to the Bering Strait, some very low concentration ice in that region. And the only real solid remaining ice right now south of that is right there along the Yukon Delta coastline. We're still waiting for that to go ahead and melt out. For the very latest ice conditions in your area, check out the interactive map where you can zoom in and check out the very particular areas of your coastline. Head to weather.gov/Anchorage/ice for the very latest information there. On to the marine forecast. South and easterly winds will continue for your daytime tomorrow, about 10 to 15 knots on the inside passages, about 2 to 3 foot seas in general. As you get down into the Clarence Strait region, you'll probably find 4 foot seas. And along the outer coast, a much stronger southeasterly flow should be found, 20 to 25 knots. With seas about 7 to 10 feet. Watch what happens on Friday. The winds really start to pick up on the inside. Gusts up to 40 knots there in the northern Linden Canal with 5 foot seas expected. 4 to 5 foot seas anywhere from the Stevens Passage to the Clarence Strait region, so a little choppier than it was. And again, a little bit of a stiff wind. The winds really start to come up across the outer coast. You're looking at sustained winds around 25 to 35 knots or so, and that should bring seas anywhere up to about 9 to 12 feet, especially just outside of Cross Sound. Further north you go, you're going to run into even stronger flow if you're heading out toward Prince William Sound, so let's take a look at that. On Thursday, east and southeasterly winds outside of the Sound. You're looking at about 25 knots inside, 30 knots outside, and 6 to 8 foot seas there. And then around the Barrens, storm force winds, and that will include parts of Shelikof Strait as well as we get into Thursday. Seas there from 15 to 20 feet inside of Cook Inlet and north of the Barrens. Considerably different story with that northeast wind, 20 to 25. Here's Friday, and remember I said those winds coming up outside of Prince William Sound. You're getting into very strong southerly winds there, 45 knots, anywhere from 16 to 17 feet. Slightly lower seas as you head to the west and southwest. Inside of Prince William Sound, a choppy day. 35 knots with 9 foot seas, and southerlies still inside of Cook Inlet, 20 to 25, but they're creeping their way northward now. North of Kenai, you're looking at 6 to 7 foot seas there on Friday. For southwest, look for a choppy day inside of Shelikof Strait. Northeasterly steady at storm force, 50 knots, 17 foot seas there. East and southeasterly winds coming into the eastern side of Kodiak Island, 18 to 20 foot seas expected there. Northeasterlies coming out of Bristol Bay and continuing their way down the peninsula coastline. Westerlies on the Pacific coast, 35 knots with a 15-foot sea. Things improve on Friday. You'll notice that southerly flow coming up through Shelikof Strait diminished greatly from Thursday down to 25 knots with a 7-foot sea. A better day there. South and westerlies inside of Bristol Bay and down the Alaska Peninsula coastline, anywhere from 20 to 35 knots. So still choppy out there, still looking at some higher seas, but things should be improving a little bit as that low pressure system moves inland. Across the Aleutians, light winds across the central and eastern chain, almost a Chamber of Commerce kind of day. And as you get out toward the west, different story. Northwesterlies 30 knots in most areas, 10 to 11 foot seas, 13 foot seas in fact between Adak and Kiska as those winds blow in from the north and west. That shifts eastward on Friday with west and northwesterly winds. Most areas about 15 to 20 knots. Expect seas around 7 to 8 foot and probably around the central and eastern coastlines there of the Aleutians along the Pacific coast. Very similar fashion expected. For the west coast on Thursday, again, here's our higher seas around low pressure in Bristol Bay. North of that, not so bad, 10 to 20 knots. Westerly onshore flow for the Yukon Delta, northerlies north of the Nunivak Island region, and easterlies into St. Paul and St. George, 15 knots with 5-foot seas. That comes up a little bit more as low pressure is moving northward, drawing in a stronger flow across the Pribilofs, 25 knots with an 8-foot sea. East and northeasterly winds being pulled out of Norton Sound and down into Nunivak Island because low pressure is right about here. You'll get 15 to 30 knot winds there with 4 to 5-foot seas, maybe even 7 to 8-foot seas around Nunivak Island and the Kuskokwim Delta. Up north, 30 knots over the ice for the Beaufort Sea, and an offshore flow continues for the Chukchi, 15 to 25 knots expected there. Just north of St. Lawrence Island, 15 knots with the northeast wind and 4-foot seas. Smaller seas inside of Kotzebue Sound, but we'll keep a steady flow over the ice for the Beaufort, 25 to 30 knots expected on Friday. Recapping tonight's weather, it's warmth that continues overnight, but winds driving up over the Alaska Range with a wind advisory, gusts to 60 miles per hour there expected across some of the regions with heightened fire danger as we go through the rest of the week.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.